Welcome back to another episode of HR Nightmares. I am not Lisa Leath, but I am Gabbi Plumez. I am guest hosting today. I come all the way from Jacksonville, Florida, back in the hometown, the roots in Wilmington. So happy to be here. I'm with Beth Looney and Hailey Sarradet.
Hello.
Our guest today, we are super excited to have her, and I'm super excited for this episode because we have not even touched on the gaming world, and that is something so big right now and is continuing to grow and grow. So I'm super excited to really pick your brain, Hailey, and learn all that there is to know. So I guess let's go ahead and kick off this episode. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do at,
Okay. Thank you, by the way, for the introduction. And thank you guys for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm a big fan of y'all's. So my background, I'll try and keep it brief, and then you can dig in if I miss anything. But so essentially, I graduated with a degree in HR. I was kind of one of those classic, undecided students for a lot of my college career. I had never identified a particular industry or product or service that interested me, but what I did know was that I just liked the people aspect of things and how talent played into the business. And so, human resources seemed like natural fit. And so I graduated with a degree in HR. I was really, really fortunate to end up with my first job in the recruiting department at a video game company in Cary, North Carolina called Epic Games. I spent 4 years there in the recruiting adjacent departments, and until moving to another video game company called Scopely. They focus specifically on mobile games, like games for your phone. And that's where I've been for about the past year until just now. I'm actually in transition right now, but that's what I've been doing up until very recently, 3 weeks ago.
Awesome. Super excited. How did you get into the gaming industry? Where did you, were you always, as a kid, were you super interested in it? How did you end up there?
So, I got into the gaming industry by accident, to be honest, because, like I said, I had never identified a particular industry I was interested in. So I kind of did the classic situation of when you graduate and nobody will hire you because you don't have any experience. So I mass applied everywhere, and it just so happened to work out that the first place that it worked out was Epic. So it was an accident that I went into the video game industry. But to answer your question about if I liked games growing up, I never thought of myself as someone who liked games growing up, but once I entered the gaming industry, I kind of thought back about it, and I did love playing with my little Game Boy Advance when I was a kid, or I was a huge Frogger fan. I don't know if you guys ever played Frogger.
Oh yeah.
But that game is I would spend hours on a computer playing Frogger. So there are bits and pieces of my childhood that I look back on, and I really did like games. Actually, more so than video games, I was always a really big board game fan. To this day, I love board games.
I do too.
I actually love board games more than video games, honestly. But I like games in general.
Right.
It's a funny thing. I think sometimes we think that the gaming industry is so geared towards boys. I'm mom of two boys, and it seemed like that was the focus.
Absolutely.
Boys. So in terms of recruiting, did you notice that you had to really look at your recruiting and really try to be more diverse in trying to get some female applicants? And how did you do that, if you did?
Yeah, so it's 100% male dominated, for sure. But there's a growing number of initiatives and programs like Women in Tech and things like that are helping on the diversity front. So to answer your question, yes, diversity was a huge focus. Not to mention that my career has been over the last 5 years or so. So that's also correlates with the time when diversity and inclusion has been a trending topic. So that my perspective may be a little skewed because of the timeline, but
right.
But yeah, I've experienced several different perspectives around how we should approach diversity in recruiting, especially in a male-dominated environment. And it's really tricky, honestly. It is, because it's one of the things I experienced just being in close proximity to recruiting is you have to balance the results with the compassion, you need to make the hire. You're held to certain quotas, not really quotas, but standards and amount and positions you need to fill.
Right. If you have an opening, you have to fill it.
If you have an opening, you have to fill
right.
it. And if there's not a woman out there who's who meets the qualifications, then you kind of have to balance that. And so it is really tricky, but I've heard a lot of different perspectives on it. I've also seen it cause trouble too.
That's interesting.
It's and I think that probably the entire recruiting community is feeling this right now with the diversity initiative heading up, but so many people have so many different perspectives on it too. So even like I've seen someone, go out of their way to hire a candidate that didn't quite meet the qualifications but was a woman because they said, we need a woman on the team, like we want to do diverse, like we want to like make our team more diverse, so like let's do what we can. And that ruffles some feathers sometimes because
and sometimes I think when you're looking at diversity, it needs to make sense for your organization. But it seems to me like that's a huge segment maybe for the marketing of these games to women players,
Right.
Yeah.
So it seems like if you had a woman's perspective, maybe that would translate into more
Yeah.
women playing and more
That's a
games that were attractive to like the women's mind and how we like to play games.
That's such a good point. And I hadn't even really thought about that before, but like probably depending on the game you're working on affects like the type or like the diversity of the talent you're trying to hire.
Because I probably wouldn't want to do the shooting games. No. But I love the games that are like all these different
That's how
like
I feel.
relationships. You like get your horse. What's that called? Is it called
Yeah, what is it? I'm curious.
Red Dead Redemption?
Red Dead
or something?
Redemption.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's the only one that I know. But I'm like, I love the story.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a first. I feel like I've met a lot of men fans of Red Dead Redemption, but I think you're the first woman fan I've met.
Probably because I'm such a good mom and I would sit there watching my child play this all the time. So.
Totally, yeah.
But yeah, so I know that one. So go ahead.
Oh, I'm just really curious too on, with all these younger generations and gaming, it's accessible, on you see live streams on YouTube. So did you have to recruit any like younger, is that a thing, like the younger generation? Are they a part in the gaming design world, right? Because that's essentially who a lot of these games are selling to, are these kids, right? So do they bring, or are there any opportunities to bring some of those younger, the younger generation on board?
That's a great question. I never had to recruit anyone younger, and also just the companies I've worked at, we've had a pretty strict, like you have to be 18 years old or older to work here type of thing. Although I will say I did hear of one scenario where we worked it out where we like partnered with like I think it was like a 16-year-old, so he wasn't quite old enough to work for us, but we made a deal with him just because he was so good that we wanted his input and we wanted his perspective on the game design and feedback. And it is interesting because it's like that's not typical for business.
Right.
It's not typical to look to a 16-year-old for like advice on what you should do or partnership or whatever. But yeah,
but you probably got some really interesting perspective though from a 16-year-old, probably an active user of what you're trying to sell. So
probably so.
Yeah.
I wasn't a part of it. Like I said, I just heard about this, so I don't know what the outcome of it actually was, but I imagine so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think another thing in gaming, the gaming world or in tech, STEM jobs, it does seem that the workday never ends. It seems like if you're working in a bank, it's definitely like we start here and we end here and we wrap up and we are in our car on the way home.
Yeah.
But it does seem like in the STEM world, particularly probably in some gaming, networking, or engineering, that there would be this long hours. How did you combat that if there were long hours?
So the gaming industry in particular, and which is really the only thing I can speak to because it's what I've spent my whole career in, is extremely prone to, they call it crunch, because the nature of games is that they release there's new releases on a quarterly schedule, whatever it is. It's all different, but you're shipping a product, so the cycle kind of goes, you're on a pretty normal schedule at the early stages, like product development, product conception, stuff like that. But then once you get down to like, okay, we're shipped like closer to the shipping date. That's what they call when they release the game live to the world. Then crunch time gets bad, and everybody's working 16-hour days. I was fortunate. There were certainly long hours, but as someone working in the recruiting and HR department, I wasn't quite as affected as, the actual developers, like the program. Like
right. No, I was wondering if there was anything that you did when you were recruiting. It's like, hey, just so you know, you're expected to work, a 16-hour day when we get to this very end stage. And did you have any like resistance to that when you were recruiting?
Oh, that's a good question. So, I actually didn't. We were encouraged. Like, we had a leader, and I'm trying to think because I've had two different video game companies, so I'll speak. It's hard to speak for both of them simultaneously. But in most of my experience,
in general, just general.
Yeah, and I think in most of my experience, we were actually encouraged to like let people know that we didn't expect that of them, because in theory we don't want to. And I've actually been really, really fortunate to work for leaders that I really respect, and I think they really do want to create a positive working environment, so they don't want that for people. So I actually don't think our crunch hours were quite as bad as maybe some other video game companies. Maybe they were, I'm not sure. But so I actually never, I didn't experience that much of having to voice that to people. It comes up with candidates for sure, because they've worked in games, they know what it's like. But when you're on the recruiting side, it's tricky, because it's I have my experience to go off of, and I'm not pressured to work crunch hours, but I don't know what it's like to work on the developing team. So I kind of defer to the hiring manager on those things.
Right.
For any questions about more specific questions about what it's like to work within that specific team, I can only speak so much on that. So I kind of defer to the hiring manager to be look, they'll have the information for you on what it's actually like in the weeds here.
Yeah.
There's some clients that we have that have definite crunch times, I guess. And it's interesting to see how they navigate that, because there is an expectation, because the business is relying on the fact that they're going to be getting this thing out the door, right?
Yeah.
So they have to get it done, but on the same time, they want to be respectful of people's time.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really interesting balance, because it seems that the people, not to generalize, but it does seem like the people that had difficulty with just putting in the extra hours, putting in the 16-hour day, tended to be the newer hires. And so that made me think perhaps it's not being discussed during the recruiting process.
Right. And I definitely think it's important to, lay that down on the table in those first initial conversations. And like you said, once you're kind of in the game, or these professional gamers, or I'm thinking also tax accountants, right? They know that they're the first quarter is going to be super busy, and then they might have some flex hours here over the summer, get your work done. So it's probably similar to that. If your industry, you kind of get it, which is helpful for the candidate, but you definitely need to voice that.
You
and
need
have
to,
that.
explain that prior, because then people come up with this wide-eyed, shocked, well, I'm going to Hawaii in April, and you're like, you're a CPA, you can't.
Right. Yeah. That's actually a great example, because there's that hard deadline where it's going to be busy up until then, leading up until then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in your experience in the years, the technology, gaming, there's so many different advancements. What have you seen in talent, or even just in the gaming industry, the advancements over the last few years?
You mean technological advancements?
Yes, that.
So the number one thing that comes to my mind, and maybe this is just from my experience working at Epic, because Epic really focused in on this, is the uptrending hype around the metaverse. That's the huge focus, is what is the metaverse going to look like, and how are we going to be a part of it with our product? Right. And so that's the number one thing. Obviously, VR is it's tricky to. I still struggle to understand exactly where VR fits into the marketplace. Because it's it's a recent, relatively new technological advance, but I don't think it's found a place in people's everyday lives. Technological advances like the internet and your smartphone, those have found a place in people's everyday life. VR, you can't really say the same. Even video games themselves, people play those every day. VR, I think I see that one kind of settling into its own niche space within tech. It's not. I think it was one of those tech fads that blew up and everybody was talking about it, but then it kind of.
Everyone wanted to try it.
Right? Everyone wanted to try
I want to try that thing on.
And it's really cool. Yeah. It's a unique experience, but it doesn't have a lot of practical use in everyday life. So I actually see VR trending more into the learning and development space a lot, which I think is really cool. And I actually would love to learn more about that, because I don't know a lot about it, but that's where I see it the most, is or onboarding, especially in the remote environment that we're in now. I've started to see companies utilize VR for their onboarding, so that you can feel really cool. Feel like you're in an immersive onboarding experience, you're hand or next to your seat by seat with your people that are onboarding with you, your coworkers. And I think VR is probably going to settle in that area. I don't know if I see VR going having a use in everyday life. I could be totally wrong, and I have no expertise on that, trend or predicting tech trends.
Right.
That would be a lot to ask. Come and tell us all the tech trends. Yeah, no, we're not asking that for sure.
But that's just where I've seen it settle. Right. It's especially I think learning and development, honestly, especially in relation to HR, I could see HR departments heavily utilizing VR for learning and development, because that's such a huge conversation right now in HR.
Well, so pilots, that's how they learn how to land planes, using video game, right? That's how they learn.
I did not know that, but that makes total sense.
Yeah, so they use that. And in fact, my son, who's in the Navy, he is on an aircraft carrier, but if the submarines, they use the game console to be able to like rise and lower the periscope, and I think that's just crazy.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So I think gaming has definitely transcended the workplace culture, but especially it'd be interesting to talk about how it's affecting HR and the whole all of our world in HR.
Absolutely. And I think that you hit it right on the head with the learning and development with the VR, because I was reading into, how things to ask you and all of that stuff. And there's a lot of training for VR and like training new managers, put them in a situation and learn, maybe do this or that. This is wrong. This is right. So I definitely agree with you that there's a ton of, opportunity there.
There's also, I was reading as well, because this is just not my specialty for sure, but I know that there are more and more companies that are using it as in the application process. So they're trying, and it's not maybe necessarily VR, but it's more, putting together kind of a video game network type of program to kind of see if people can kind of do the tasks that they're asked to do. Because sometimes you see a resume and you're like, well, sure, I think you know how to do it. But if you actually physically have to do it. And I was reading something about Domino's Pizza, and they had these people trying to like create these extraordinary pizzas. And they actually made some hiring decisions based on how they did in that game. It was a predictive factor for how they would do it at the job. So
that's actually really cool. Yeah. I like that a lot.
It would be smart to get in on that.
Yeah.
We've got to figure out some games.
Yeah. I like how that you can showcase your creativity too. It's not just like, I can do this. Like I'm following the directions, because I think that's big on gaming too. It's like, you have to do this. This is the goal. But to showcase some creativity is really cool too. Really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also interesting to actually observe the decision-making patterns of someone rather than just having them tell you, because obviously everybody's putting their best face on for an interview. They're going to tell you, here's what I would do in this situation, or here's how I make this decision. But I think the VR aspect is interesting, because you actually get to see what they would do in that situation, which I guess is kind of the idea behind like the 90-day probationary periods and stuff like that. But
well, it is interesting. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that with the internet, you can find out anything. So your resume looks like this person is perfect, but without actually trying them out, and sometimes maybe making the commitment to hire somebody and then doing that 90 days as opposed to doing it on the front end. That might be the new trend for HR. I love that.
Love that. We got to get into that.
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to see how that affected like time to fill metrics, because that's huge in recruiting, because I imagine that's a longer process than just interviewing some. Maybe not, honestly. I don't know.
Do this game and get back to us,
Right, yeah. And then like the actual recruiter or hiring manager, whoever it is, a person having to actually review all of those things like that. That
would take your time.
It's like, is that more time consuming or less time consuming than interviewing? Like, I don't know. And if it is, do the benefits outweigh the pros outweigh the cons,
Sometimes on Indeed, when I'm hiring, I'll ask people to submit those tests. And it's shocking to me how few people, I would say maybe, I'm going to take a stab at this, but I would say like 40% complete those tests. The other 60% don't. Have you guys noticed that? They don't.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And you're like, but this is the requisite. You have to do this for us to consider you as a candidate.
Right. So if you're a candidate out there listening, please, if a recruiter, a hiring manager, a manager has that on Indeed, LinkedIn, whatever platform that we're recruiting for, please fill out that assessment. That's just some HR advice right there.
Sticks you in the no pile right away. Right. And you might be this excellent candidate that you think, this is not required or a requisite, and it really is.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and that's a constant conversation. The recruiting community, I feel like it's always having as well, is like what is the right number or the right number of like barriers to entry, because I think there's always a constant like pull and push of we want the full talent pool, like we want to know everyone that's out there, and we want to make it easy to apply, and also we only want people who really, really want that, like who care enough to do the assessment, who care enough to take their time out of their day or whatever. So it's kind of like tricky, especially with technical roles, because there is an aspect of it where you have to know that they can do the technical part,
Right.
you know? Like that's a non-negotiable because it's part of the job.
Right.
So that's like one of the conversations I've heard a lot of varying opinions on too, working in recruiting, is like what's the right level of barrier to entry to have. But I think it varies depending on the market. Like, you know, in the last 5 years, we've been in the majority of my career has been in a like economic up cycle. So it's, you know, it kind of like the power dynamic shifted to the labor market rather than the employer. So in that kind of market, you may want to just like destroy the barriers to entry and like get everyone you can because you're having a hard time finding candidates. But in an economic downturn, you may want to put up more barriers to entry because it's like, you know, you're probably going to get a lot of less. You need to filter out more,
Right.
Because you're just the power dynamic shifts.
And sometimes I think that determinant is not so much. I think the determinant is on how much time the staff has to train up.
Yeah.
You know, so it fluctuates. Sometimes you'll want to take somebody and you have a lot of time or a lot of resources to train up.
Yeah.
And so then you might take someone with less experience, right? Because that might be a really good, you know, advantage to your company because maybe other people aren't looking at them and they have these great skills. But then the other time is if your resources are really depleted.
Yes.
And you don't have time to train, you're going to want to take someone with a higher caliber, right?
1,000%. Yeah.
So.
I really think a lot of recruiting is about timing, like because of situations like that, you know, like if you could apply for the same position in the same company like a year ago, and maybe they had the bandwidth and the resources to take a chance on someone, like, you know, hire someone who maybe they would have to invest a lot more time into, but you know, a year from now, that maybe they're too busy and they can't do that. So
That's true. I mean, I've seen it a lot like that. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Can we do a hot take one real quick? So job applications, and as recruiters, you know, HR, we're reviewing. What do you guys think of, you know, having people submit the job application and their resume? You know, we're putting in the same information, all of that. What are your opinions on that process? And if you have any advice for other recruiters or hiring managers or people that are just, you know, business owners doing the recruiting themselves.
it's a really tricky one because like my gut instinct is I absolutely hate it when companies make you fill in all the same information that is on your resume. It's like tedious. It probably creates a higher candidate drop-off rate, you know, people who start to apply but then don't finish because they just don't want to go through 7 pages of applications. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I understand why they do it because they want the data, you know, and you can't, I don't believe we've figured out a great way to pull that data directly from the resume and keep it clean. And so like, I understand that the organizations, they want to understand the talent pool they have. They want to like have clean data as possible. And I think it's just about balancing priorities. Like what's more important to you? Like having a wider candidate pool where you may get more candidates who aren't, you know, you may get the more candidates because you're not putting them through those barriers to entry, or having the data. And it's like whatever's more important to your business at that time, I think makes the most sense for you.
I like that. Yeah.
I cannot stand it. I cannot stand, it's one of my biggest pet peeves. And I work with smaller companies. So I tend not to work, you know, for big like Corning or GE that they might have to do that.
Yeah.
But for smaller businesses, I think that when you ask them to submit their resume and essentially take literally line by line off the resume into their system, I just think it kind of is, it's disrespectful of people's time.
Mm-hmm. Tedious.
Exactly. And you're going to be getting the same information. And if you're basing your decision only on the resume and not maybe a phone screen, I think you're really missing the boat.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and with smaller businesses, I think that makes total sense because you're probably, if you're a smaller business, you're probably not at the point where you need to manage the data, micromanage the data so closely, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's important that as a recruiting team, HR team, you got to keep in mind you want to put the candidate first and really have, like, make that experience the best, because ultimately that's the foundation of a great employee experience, you know? So really trying to figure out your process when it comes to hiring, make it as quick and as efficient, but really getting to know that candidate too, because ultimately you wanted to make it a great fit on both parties. So I think keeping in mind that put the candidate first and their experience, because if they do join your team, you give them that offer, you want to make sure that they ride that same great experience through and like through their time as an employee.
Exactly.
So
Did you do, because you were in a different field that I'm not familiar with, but did you find that you were getting a lot of recent grads, or did you really look for people with like this load, multiple years of experience?
So I think it depends on what position like I was working on at the time, but the majority of my background was also it was kind of it was a lot in recruiting operations. So there was really a short period of time where I was doing full cycle recruiting. So the only reason I say that is just to preface my answer by saying there's a limited scope of positions that I worked on that. So I think we got, to be honest, I think we just got a lot of everything because I was at Epic Games at a time when Fortnite had like just blown up and it was really so it was kind of like
Fortnite.
Even I know that one.
it was a huge, so like when that happens you kind of just get an influx of applications, like just high volume,
Unsolicited, I'm sure too.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
They're like, we want to be with you all.
Exactly, yeah. So I think we just I just remember seeing the full spectrum, honestly. We had just started an internship program when I was there, so we certainly had a lot of new grad applications from that. But my main memory is just getting an influx of like everything across the board.
That's cool. I think that a lot of colleges and universities are adding an esports. I know UNCW here in town, they added a club a few years back. So I think more colleges are opening their eyes like, oh, this is an opportunity. There's students that are really, really great at this and they need the practice, get some stuff early on their resume to have that club and resource there available. And I think that's really great, especially at UNCW. I worked with them at my previous role. We did a couple of different trainings and stuff, and really a great group. And I think that's super helpful for recruiters in that space to be, team up with the university and have a talent pool right there,
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. I didn't know UNCW had added that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it's like a proven, right? So
Yep.
it's not just on the resume. It's like you can prove to the examples that they've done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think also I read an article. Dr. Pastor is the club owner. I think that he probably has a more official name over there, but he is working with them and their fitness because it's proven to be, if they are healthy and they have eye-to-hand coordination, they're going to be quicker when they play the games, and it goes hand in hand. So I think that is super interesting, and I think that falls into HR because in our workplace, we want our people to be healthy, right? Because we want them to show up to work. So I think it's super interesting that the gaming world is tapping into the fitness and like health and wellness and kind of merging the two,
And that's a really great thing to have, especially for small businesses that might not have the salaries to attract people. You can attract so many great candidates, I think, with your benefit pool.
Absolutely.
And I was seeing an uptick where I saw some people that were, giving the Calm app as a subscription. That was something. But now we have some companies that are like, our people sit all day. We need to like have them be reminded to get up and like go walk outside and get fresh air. And so they have these dings. And it's funny if I'm working on a particular
Ding,
day
ding, ding.
and I'm like, must be time to take a walk.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I had noticed that too in the gaming industry, that health and fitness is becoming like it's on the uprise because like the nature of gaming is you sit, like you just sit. And it's interesting that I'm really glad to hear that, corporations are starting to think about that too. Cause I feel like it's probably a result of, for the last, like, people, if you think of all of human history, people didn't start sitting at a desk all day until maybe like 50, 60 years ago or something. And like, I feel like, we've gone through a whole generation of people who've done that, and we're starting to realize, okay, maybe we should, maybe we should incorporate some sort of physical activity.
Some wellness.
You know?
Walking meetings, love those.
Yeah,
Love a
I
good
love walking meetings.
Yeah.
We used to do, I had one hiring manager who loved to do meetings over a game of ping pong, and I thought that was really, really
fun.
cool. Yeah.
I couldn't concentrate. I would be like, what do I want? The meeting or the ping pong? I love ping pong.
It's probably tricky. It's probably not for everyone, and I was terrible at ping pong too, so
Well, and especially like there's such a stereotype, maybe I have got the wrong stereotype in mind, but of these, guys and they're working on this stuff and it's like late hours and they haven't gotten up and they're ordering food in. And so I'm sure that as the owner of the business, you would really want to ensure the health and, safety of your employees for sure.
Yeah.
Get them up, see some sunshine, get a salad.
Yeah, exactly. Go on a walk.
Right.
And it's interesting because actually one of the big trends in the gaming industry is to like provide a lot of free food and snacks, and it's typically not very healthy snacks like chips and gummies and stuff. So I'll be curious to see if they kind of evolve towards like offering more healthy options and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And while we're on the topic of benefits, I want to touch on gamification and how to incorporate that into the workplace. And I've seen it with benefits, different companies, you get these Bravo points or whatever these points, and it's this whole gaming experience. And it's like, oh, I'm doing a good job. Here's 1,500 points that you can then go have the choice to go spend it on whatever you want, a leaf blower or a trip to the Bahamas. That's super cool. So I'd love to hear all about gamification in your world, and if you during your experience, how did you incorporate that with gamers?
Yes. Okay. So, and I'd actually maybe after the podcast or something love to hear more about the cases you've seen of that, because I'm always really interested in companies that are incorporating gamification. So I feel like the succinct answer to your question is I was really shocked while working in the gaming industry at how little gamification there was in the work environment, like in the actual operations of the business. Because, we, in theory, gamers, they're experts on gamification. They make games, they design games, but I did not see a lot of that incorporated into the actual operations of the business. But working, the exposure to the gaming industry is actually what got me so interested in gamification in the industry. Because I'm sitting here thinking, wait, we're a video game company and we're not even doing this. Like we're the experts on how to engage people, and that's what video games do. They're the masters of creating engaging experiences that people, they can't quit. They never want to leave. And so I actually, to be perfectly honest, I didn't see a lot of that. Okay. I didn't see a lot of it. And I would love to start seeing corporations do more of it. And I think they are. I think it's a growing trend. But I think it's at the early stages of the trend. So I'm curious to see how it goes.
Do you think that you can expand on what that could look like for businesses if they've never even heard the term gamification and how to incorporate that into their workplace for their employees? Could you expand on like a possible situation in your head, and now your wheels are turning? What in a perfect world would that look like?
Yeah. So and I'll preface my answer by saying that all of my knowledge comes purely from like exposure, like random things I hear here and there, and just my own independent study. So I'm certainly not an expert on the matter, but what I see, like when you're designing a video game, there's a handful of like key components that mostly all video games like universally use, because they've been proven to engage people and like keep people motivated to keep going. And they use them in different ways. Maybe they use them. And they're, they kind of use it as an a la carte menu. Some use some don't. But essentially, there's like basically you could consider it a menu of things that you do to keep people engaged. So some of the main ones I think of are number one is the onboarding experience. So like storytelling, like connecting the player to the game through a story, like really painting the picture for them. Like, why are they playing this game? What happened? Like Legend of Zelda, Link, the princess has been captured and you're the hero trying to save the princess, whatever. Mario, that story could probably be used for several video games. But, like they make you the hero and then they tell you the story of why you're trying to do what you're trying to do. So they really connect you to the mission of the game. Like, what is your mission? What are you here to do? And like, what is your objective? So that's number one. Like they're amazing at using really good stories. To like connect the player to why they're doing. So one of the things I've noticed in companies is they don't always lean on that storytelling or like connecting the employee to the mission of the company and telling the story of like, here's what our company does. Here's like how our different revenue streams are. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's our mission as a company, and like really telling the story. They did that really effectively when I worked at Epic Games, and it made a huge difference for me because Epic Games was a classic. Kid started a business from his dad's basement and it grew, and it's the American dream story, and like that's a really cool thing to be a part of. So I think storytelling is a huge one. Onboarding, like using storytelling in your onboarding, is a huge one. Like connecting the employee to what they're there for, beyond themselves. Like they have a job, like maybe they're an accountant or whatever, but it's more than just about what their individual job is. It's about what they're contributing to in the bigger picture, like connecting to that story. So storytelling is one. Another one is like metrics and progress bars. Like when you're in a video game, you can always tell how much longer you have to go to complete your goal. Like there's always a progress bar. There's always like indications of how far you've come and how far you have to go. And there's key objectives and milestones. So you never have a question in your head of like, where is this going? Why am I doing this? You know why you're doing it. Like
also, there must be a motivation factor too, because you're like, ooh, I've got 2 more to get to the end,
huge
and then I'll get
motivation
this
factor.
big thing.
Yeah.
You know, and then I'll get to the next level. So I'm sure that you could do that for sure in performance management. I could really see that being a wonderful place for that.
1,000%. And I'm actually glad you mentioned motivations as well, because another thing video game companies do really well is they do a deep study and analysis of the motivations of their players. Like, why is the player playing this game? Like, what are they motivated by, and what brings them to this game? Because you can have a game, like you can have 2 different people playing the same game, and they're playing for completely different reasons. And they study that. They say, like, what is motivating people to come to this game? Is it the social aspect? Is it because they can play with their friends and they don't really care about actually winning? Is it the competitive aspect? Do they just like to compete? Is it the story? Like, is it the lore? What is it? And then they use that data to like figure out like how they market to different players. And I don't think there's a 1-to-1 way you can transfer that into the workforce, but I do think that like in HR, we could probably do a better job of incorporating people's motivations into like our hiring decisions, our performance management decisions, because I think we tend to do very experience and skills-based hiring, but there's also a huge motivation component that comes into hiring.
Well, and then the whole retention piece is all based on, I mean, if you've gone through all that time to get your people at these gaming places, I mean, you really want to keep them.
Yeah.
Because otherwise someone else will scoop them. But I do notice that if anyone listening, I think that if you're a small business or mid-sized business, or if you didn't even know about this, one of the biggest things that you can do to kind of help your retention is each person is motivated differently.
Yes.
How you were saying, how to play the game, but everyone comes to work with a different motivation. I need to make money for my family. I really love the prestige of working here at this particular place, or I love the independence or creativity. I mean, there's a whole host of things. And if you can identify what motivates each person and then really act towards making sure that you're touching those things all the time, they're going to stay. And it's really interesting. And you always think, it's motivation is always money, and it's not always money.
It's not always money.
No.
A lot of times it's not money, honestly.
It's funny. That's not. I mean, I want money. Don't get me wrong, but my motivation is like flexibility.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's like I really want to have a flexible schedule, and so that's why I like working with us. You know, so it's an interesting thing. But if you can capture that maybe with gaming, that's huge. I would love that. We need to get smarter and figure out how to make these things, because I mean, those are just wonderful opportunities, I think.
Well, now we know Hailey, so we got to put our heads together.
Oh my gosh.
Let's create some stuff.
Oh my God, I could work on it all day. But I think you're exactly right. And I think the motivation piece, I think, gets really tricky with performance management, because one of the things I see is like a lot of times someone will assume the people they're managing are motivated by the same things they are, and they'll say, and they'll try and mentor them in a way where it's like, if I am as a manager care about career progression and just climbing the ladder and commercial success,
right?
Then like maybe I manage my direct reports that way. Okay, and I'll say, if you wanna get to the next level, you need to do this. If you want, and meanwhile the direct report is thinking, I don't care about getting to the next level. I'm just here to have a job and feed my family. This job is not my whole life, but
right.
And so I think there's a lot of just miscommunication around that, but it's not talked about in a formal setting that much, so people don't always know how to address it effectively.
Absolutely. And I think that honestly, that's a mic drop. And I think that one piece of advice, I think that's the greatest thing to take away, is to have those conversations with your employees on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Check in, see what motivates them there when you first hire them, and keep checking in, because I think you're right that you have to be on the same page, or at least understand what they want, so you can kind of help them, with their career journey. That's ultimately what is going to keep them with you. So
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that is That's it. So do you have any last pieces of advice or anything that you want to tell our audience? We have HR managers, employees, regular managers, business owners. They're all tuning in. Any last piece of advice?
And I think if I had to just say, if I have to narrow it down to one, I would kind of piggyback off of what we just talked about. Like in recruiting specifically, I think there's so much focus on skills and experience, but if you can just kind of like just have like a self-awareness of what it is that you actually want out of the job, like what would be a mutually beneficial what would make a mutually beneficial relationship to you, between you and the company, and then go after a job that gives you that, rather than going after a job where, you know, like I think people get so caught up in I just need a job, like, and so I hear a lot of advice that advises job seekers to do what they think the company wants to hear. But I think we should pivot and just try and advise people in a way where just know what you want, and then go get that. And
Absolutely.
And some companies can offer you that, and some companies can't. But it's not about the company doesn't hold all the power. It's a mutual beneficial relationship. So.
Absolutely. And I think that's important for us as recruiters in HR, that we want a great fit on both ends. So
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's going to create a long-term employee relationship that lasts, you know?
Yep.
Rather than just, I need to make a hire, let's, you know, and then they're gone in a year.
There we go.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. There we go. Thank you, Hailey, so much for coming on HR Nightmares.
Thank you, guys.
It was so awesome to talk to you and get to learn more about what it goes into the recruiting world in the gaming industry. It's super interesting because I had no experience with that, and I know Beth didn't either. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you,
to our
guys.
listeners out there, if you are enjoying HR Nightmares, make sure that you hit that subscribe button and follow us on YouTube. We're on every platform out there: Spotify, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, all of that good stuff. Make sure you hit that bell so you know when our next episode drops. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Awesome. That was fun.
That was good.